Binding contracts have the potential of making you massive amounts of GP. And in this video, I'm going to be testing each method individually and seeing how much GP we actually make. So if you're excited for making an insane amount of GP on an AFKable level, make sure you stay tuned. Let's dive in. So if you haven't caught on from the intro, it is going to be killing hellhounds for the binding contracts. As for the requirements, they are super low. You do need 45 Slayer and 45 Summoning in order to bind a hellhound inside of a binding contract. You also need the Dagon Bind Mystery unlocked through Archaeology, which does require 68 Archaeology to get done, but that is necessary in order for you to be able to make the binding contracts to do this method. As for the recommended, I do recommend 92 prayer, but we can touch this a little bit deeper in this video because you actually don't need prayer if you are using necromancy. Level 70 invention for the Oldak coil for this method using the Oldak coil within the resource dungeon is massive. And you'll see later on in this video when I show you a little bit of the gameplay on how to do this method. But in order to get into the resource dungeon, you do need level 55 dungeoneering. Now, you don't need access to the resource dungeon for the Hellhounds because right outside of the Hellhound resource dungeon entrance, there's a bunch of spawns of Hellhounds out there. You're just not going to kill as many per hour since they spawn kind of further apart. Now, doing this method my way, I was able to get 30.7 million GP per hour using necromancy. You could also expect around 110,000 XP per hour with necromancy, plus you can also gain about 40,000 XP per hour for your constitution, since these things don't have too much health, and since they did the rework for how you gain experience with constitution, this is a little on the low end. As for the gear setup, I'm running with the tier 90 Death Dealer Necromancy set, which you can honestly do this in the tier 80 Death Dealer set if you really wanted to. Highly suggest that you don't augment these because they don't dissolve over time, and augmenting them will just eat into your profits as well. And that goes for your tier 90 weapons as well. Even if you are using tier 80s, don't augment them. It will eat into your profits if you augment them. So I highly suggest, again, do not augment any of your gear for this method. As you may have already have seen, I did not use an aura for this entire method. Now, I do highly suggest if you are to go with a melee route or a ranging route to maybe use a vampirism aura here and then throw a demon horn necklace on and bring a bone crusher so you can use soul split while also regenerating your prayer doing this method. Next up, we do have the Zuck Cape, which is mandatory for anything you want to do with Death Skulls, of course. We are going to be using Death Skulls with this method. Also, you will notice that I do have a Blood Amulet of Fury on the inventory for the setup for you guys. But in the gameplay, you'll notice that I'm using a Demon Horn necklace with the Bone Crusher in the inventory because I just thought I was going to be using Soul Split or Deflective Melee, but it didn't come to that case. Next up, I do have the Luck of the Dwarves on. Now, this is also before I reread the wiki that they do not have a rare drop table. So I would highly suggest putting on DPS ring here for your sake. Now, I do have a Nexus to hold all of my ruins, but in this method, all you're literally going to be using is your Ectoplasm for just your conjures. I also have the Scripture of When God book. Now, in the beginning of the gameplay, in my hour of Hellhound killing, I did have it on and active, but then I realized I did not need it, so I turned it off about halfway through. So if you guys have the new Underworld Grimoire, and you don't want the extra prayer XP from the Bone Crusher, you can easily equip the Grimoire so it can do an auto loot for all of the bones straight into your ritual box. Now, for the inventory, this was my initial setup before realizing that I absolutely don't need almost anything inside of this inventory. I honestly thought I was going to need overloads while doing this method, but during the gameplay, you will see that I just turn off my potion reservoirs and I'm withstanding everything about it. Now, I was going to bring a Holy Scarab with me and use it through this method, but I realized that I didn't need my prayer up for any kind of deflect melee or the soul split, so it was never even used. You'll actually see me dump it off into the loot pile just because I didn't need it and I wanted some more space to collect binding contracts. You're also going to need your magic notepaper so you can note all of the binding contracts from all the kills that you get with the Hellhounds. As for the Bone Crusher, if you have it in your tool belt, good for you. You don't need to do too much, but maybe to toggle it on and off, you know how to do that if that's the case. Now, you don't have to bring it Now, if you want your prayer XP, sure, you can bring it along, but you don't have to, and it'll give you more space to make this a little bit more AFKable with the Hellhound method. Of course, you're going to bring your binding contracts, which you're going to be doing about 700 kills after you've made the binding contracts within the hour. Next up, you're going to have all of your cannonballs, which this method does take about 1,000 cannonballs. And then you're going to have your Odak coil, which I will tell you exactly where you need to place within the resource dungeon to make the best possible profit of this. Now, before getting into the actual method, first off, you have to do the agonizing part of making your binding contracts. Now, with this method I'm about to tell you, you can make about 700 binding contracts in about 20 minutes. So with this method, all you have to do is you go to Taverly, you bring all of the materials. You bring your pouches, your blue charms, your spirit shards, your hellfire metal, and your blood of Orcus. Once you get over to the obelisk, there will be a trader there called Magistics. What you're going to do is you're going to take your blood of Orcus and your hellfire metal, and you're going to sell little by little to the trader in the store. Now, I say little by little because for as long as your materials sit inside of the trader's store, it starts to deteriorate. So you'll notice that I have 1,400 of each hellfire metal and blood of Orcus, and at the end, I only make about 682 binding contracts. So over time, it starts to disappear from the store. Now, the place to go for them is the Hellhound Resource Dungeon. That is the #1 place. If you don't have the requirements to be able to get into that dungeon, then just the Taverly dungeon will do. Now, the fastest way of getting there is using your Dungeoneering cape, just clicking on the Taverly Resource Dungeon, and it will pop you right into the Taverly dungeon right in front of the entrance. If you don't have the pleasure, you're going to have to run through the Taverly dungeon itself. There's a couple little things you have to do, like getting a dusty key to get through the Blue Dragon room, but you can probably look that up and get through that pretty quickly. Now, once you made it into the resource dungeon, what you're going to do is you're going to run all the way to the back corner, and you're going to set up your Odak coil and fill it with some cannonballs. As for the Rebo bar, it is going to be as simple can be. You're going to use Death Skulls, Conjure Army, Ghost, and then you're going to use Soul Strike first, and then Soul Sap. Since the Odak coil is going to be doing majority of the killing, you're hardly ever going to be using abilities. So this Revo bar itself will allow you to gain enough adrenaline over time to be able to do Death Skulls every time it is off cooldowns, and then you're also going to have your Conjures up and running around. You want to make sure that your Ghost is at least out there because that's your healing process with this method. Now, Soul Strike is an AoE ability, so when you use a Soul Sap and you gain at least 1 soul and you actually use a Soul Strike, you'll be hitting multiple targets. And then all you have to do is literally sit back, relax, and let the show begin. You're just going to have to check your inventory every so often to make sure you're not full, and just magic note paper every single binding contract that you have. Don't accidentally click on a binding contract and summon a Hellhound. That's just a waste of a binding contract. So after doing about 20 minutes of binding contract making and about 40 minutes of actually killing the Hellhounds, I was actually able to sell all 700 above GE price for 90.6 million GP. With all of my expenses, that is going to leave me around the 30.7 million GP per hour mark. To me, who is a novice at the game itself, is pretty insane to have 30 mil plus an hour on something that's so AFKable and such easy creatures to kill. That also requires very low gear and inventory. In this method, we will be needing to be able to make the binding contracts. So with that being said, the requirements for this, you will need 75 Slayer to be able to do damage to the gargoyles. You will need 75 Summoning to be able to capture the souls inside of the binding contract. You'll need at least 70 plus combat, just, you're able to deal with the gargoyles. You'll also need the Dagon by Mystery completed in order to be able to make the binding contracts, which does require 68 Archaeology. Now, as for my recommended, I recommend getting the auto killing blows perk from your Slayer Master unlocked. I would have put it as a requirement, but if you're going to make this an AFKable method, then you would put that into the requirements. But I recommended it just because there's a bunch of people who might not have the Slayer points and want to at least give this a go. But this does make a huge benefit to your profits. Now in this video, I'm going to be starting to do something new. I'm going to start using every single style that is capable of doing the method I am showing. So in this video, we are going to be using all 4 styles. Each style in this method is going to be using the tier 70 gear and weapons other than the range setup where it does have the Mecha Chinchampas. Now each setup will also be using the Vampirism Aura, having the Max Cape, using the Blood Amulet of Fury, the Luck of the Dwarves, and having the Scripture of When God Book in the pocket slot but not activated. Now the ammo slot will differ depending on the style you are using for obvious reasons. Now below each of those pictures you will see the Revo bar I was using while doing this method, so you can just easily copy them, put them in your Revo bar, play with it a little bit, but these are the ones that I was able to get the most profits out of. Now using these gear setups and these Revo bars, I was looking at about 25.4 to 30 million GP per hour depending on what style I was using. I was also looking at about 600,000 combat XP per hour, no matter what style I was using during this method. After that, looking at about 200,000 XP per hour as well, no matter what style, they all gain the same. Now for the inventory, you can bring some potion reservoirs if you would like, so you can make it a little bit more AFKable, but again, you will have to know all of the binding contracts. Next, I have a Holy Aggro Overload. You can just bring an aggression potion. They do the trick just as well. After that, I do have a full restore flask in the inventory just in case you're doing it at a lower level and you need some prayer help. After that, I do have the binding contracts. Without the binding contracts, of course, it is not a true money maker. Then we have some magic note papers to be able to note all of those binding contracts. Now, since I did not unlock all of the stuff to go on the tool belt, I do have a charm imp inside of the inventory for all of the destroying of the charms, so I get some summoning experience. After that, I do have the artificial measure. You guys can just bring a normal gem bag. That works perfectly fine. They do drop a bunch of gems. As for the familiar you're going to want to use, if you're not using a legendary pet for the killing blow ability, you can either use a bunyip or a holy scarab. The bunyip will heal you over time, while the holy scarab will also reduce how much prayer you are using for either your curses or your normal prayer book. But I'm going to leave that up to you guys for you guys to decide what fits you best. Now I do have the Mask of a Granite. If you guys don't have that, you can always get it through Treasure Hunter eventually, or the DXP store whenever that comes around. You can use the tokens to be able to unlock a mask. But the Mask of Granite does give you an immediate teleport to all of the gargoyle locations. Plus it also gives you a DPS boost if you wear it while killing gargoyles up until you hit 1,000 kills. Next, I do have a spring cleaner. They do drop a lot of alchables, so you can make a little extra profit along the way, or you can just use it for the disassembling part. After that, I do have an enhanced Excalibur. If you're a lower level and you have that in your inventory, that could be very helpful for extra healing. Now, I do have an Ancient Elven Ritual Shard in here. If you are using curses or prayers, that could come very useful for the prayer regen. Now, before getting into the actual method, first off, you have to do the agonizing part of making your binding contracts. Now, with this method I'm about to tell you, you can make about 700 binding contracts in about 20 minutes. So with this method, all you have to do is you go to Taverly, you bring all of the materials. You bring your pouches, your blue charms, your spirit shards, your hellfire metal, and your blood of Orcus. Once you get over to the obelisk, there will be a trader there called Magistix. What you're going to do is you're going to take your blood of Orcus and your hellfire metal, and you're going to sell little by little to the trader in the store. Now, I say little by little because for as long as your materials sit inside of the trader's store, it starts to deteriorate. So you'll notice that I have 1,400 of each hellfire metal and blood of Orcus, and at the end I only make about 682 binding contracts. So over time it starts to disappear from the store. The best place to fight gargoyles is the top floor of the Slayer Tower. To get there, all you have to do is teleport to the Coniferous Lodestone and then run west, and then you'll see it up on the north side. Now, once you get to the Slayer Tower, you're going to run through the front gate. Then you're going to go to the middle staircase and climb to the top floor. So you're on the outside of the gargoyle area. Before you actually go into the tower, make sure to talk to Marcus for a Slayer contract. You will be able to gain additional Slayer XP or GP depending on what you choose while picking up the Slayer contract, but make sure you return it back to Marcus after you have actually completed it. Now, once you get into the room with the gargoyles, the best place that I found was at the end of the rug in the middle of the room. While doing this method in this same exact spot, I was able to get 448 kills with melee, 428 kills with range, 500 with magic, 528 with necromancy. And all of these numbers are after the fact of making binding contracts, which will take about 20 minutes to make 700, and then you use 40 minutes of actually taking out the gargoyles. Now, to make binding contracts, it does cost around 79,000 per binding contract to make. So if you guys select the melee style for this method and you do get around 448 kills within the 40 minutes of going at it, you are looking at about 25.4 million GP of pure profit on only the binding contracts, not even the drops. Now, as for the magic style, if you guys use the extinguish spell like I did, I know there's more cost-effective ways, but I was just trying to make it more of a mid-level and more expensive to see what I can actually make. And if you do get 500 kills in that 40 minutes, you're looking at 28.3 million GP after all expenses for just the binding contracts, which is also insane. And if you're going to be using the necromancy style, just like 90% of the game is right now, and you do get about 528 kills in that 40 minutes after using the ectoplasm and the binding contract expenses, you're going to be looking at about close to 30 mil in that 40 minutes of killing gargoyles. So if you're using range as your style as well, you got to be a little bit more careful because you're going to be using mecha chins in order to be able to do the AoE damage that you have to do. But if you're going to use all of that and you get around 428 kills within that 40 minutes after the binding contract expenses, and the mecha chins of course being 1.1 mil for that 40 minutes, which is absurd, you're still looking at about 24.3 million GP in that 40 minutes of killing gargoyles. So for this method, it is super laid back. You don't have to worry. As you see through this entire video, I didn't use any type of curses. I didn't use any type of prayer. My blood amulet of fury and my vampirism aura are keeping me healthy. And my bunyip is also doing a little extra healing as well. So you have no concerns about dying to gargoyles unless you're attempting to take them out when you're like a level 40 combat style. But this is possibly one of the best AFK money making methods in the game, other than having to note your binding contracts over time. For this method, the requirements are pretty low. You're going to need 50 summoning just so you can be able to capture the souls inside of the binding contract and use the Water Fiend binding contract. Also, you're going to need the Dagon by Mystery completed, which does require 68 archaeology. As for the recommended, I do recommend 90 combat, which we're going to be using necromancy in this method today, but you can also get away with doing 80 combat. 90 combat just makes it a lot faster so you can make more profit. I would also highly recommend having the restocking perk for any cannon when you do any kind of AFK method, just because you can just restock it. You don't have to worry about clicking on your cannon. But again, it's not a highly recommended thing here. You can always bring some aggro overloads or some aggro pots just in general. Doing this method, you're going to be looking at about 62 mil GP per hour after all of your expenses. For something that's AFK, it is perfection. Now you're also going to be looking at about 400,000 XP per hour for your constitution and about 1.1 million XP per hour with necromancy, which is nuts. As for the gear, we are going to be running with the tier 90 in this setup. Again, you can run with the tier 80. These guys don't hit hard and they don't have much life points. So we're going to be running with the tier 90 Death Dealer set just so we have that 5% chance of being able to put on a death mark. We also have the Vampirism Aura, which will help us stay alive through this method because you don't really need to do too much. Zuck Cape, I have the Zuck Cape on. Yes, I do. But you can also get away with the Reef Walker Cape if you have it. If not, any cape will actually do here. We will also be running with the Blood Fury Amulet. We have the Reaver Ring on here. You can bring the Luck of the Dwarves or any kind of luck enhancers since they are a Slayer creature that are above level 80. I do have a Grasping Rune pouch inside of my slot item. It's just because of a prayer bonus, just because I don't have the upgraded Nexus. I am running with the tier 90 weapons just to show you guys that you don't need the tier 95s. And you'll also see within the kills that even tier 80 could easily do this. I also have the Scripture of When book, just again for the stat bonuses. I don't even use it during this method. As for the inventory, pretty simple. I have a full restore. We don't use it. We actually don't use any prayers during this method as well. I have my Nexus with all of my necromancy runes in it. You're going to need a lot more note paper. This is just a sample inventory for you guys, but bring your magic note papers for all of your binding contracts. You're going to bring your cannon balls, your charming imps, since they do drop a lot of charms, your spring cleaner, and any kind of gem bag, because they do drop a little bit of gems, and your binding contracts, which are the most important for your inventory. Now, before getting into the actual method, first off, you have to do the agonizing part of making your binding contracts. Now, with this method I'm about to tell you, you can make about 700 binding contracts in about 20 minutes. So with this method, all you have to do is you go to Taverly, you bring all of the materials. You bring your pouches, your blue charms, your spirit shards, your hellfire metal, and your blood of Orcus. Once you get over to the obelisk, there will be a trader there called Magistics. What you're going to do is you're going to take your blood of Orcus and your hellfire metal, and you're going to sell little by little to the trader in the store. Now, I say little by little because for as long as your materials sit inside of the trader's store, it starts to deteriorate. So you'll notice that I have 1,400 of each hellfire metal and blood of Orcus, and at the end, I only make about 682 binding contracts. So over time, it starts to disappear from the store. Now, the spot that we are going to be going to is in the wilderness, but again, the wilderness is not a scary place anymore. So to get there pretty quickly, you can either go to the Fort Ferently lodestone, run up north through your own gate, or jump over a wall, and then you're just going to run northwest past all of the zombies right up here next to the water, and you'll see a little pathway where all of the water fiends are at. You're just going to run there. Another way you can also get there, if you're higher level, you can use your Dungeoneering cape and teleport to the Calgarian Demon Resource Dungeon, and you're just going to run south. You're going to run through the little gateway that the guy tells you, be careful. Are you sure you want to go through it? Yes. You run around, you'll see the water fiends right on the other side of the water. You just run around the boat right to the spot, and you just get to work. Or you can also go to the Daemonheim dig site or Daemonheim itself and just run south, and it will take you right to the same entrance into the wilderness that you just saw us run through. Before we fully dive into the method, I would like to point out that 96% of you are not subbed to the channel. Maybe you tried subbing before, maybe you misclicked it. Go back down, double check to see if you hit it. If not, make sure to hit it. It does help out with making content for the channel for the future. It is free, and it is probably the most appreciative thing that you can give to me at the moment. But with that being said, let's get back into the method. So when you get into the water fiend area, you're going to go over, you're going to lay down a cannon, you're going to fill it with your cannonballs, you're going to turn on your vampirism aura, and then you're going to let everything else work together. You don't need to use any type of prayers at all with this method, since they don't hit very hard, and you can take them out fairly quickly. As for the Revo bar, it's going to be pretty simple. You're going to use Conjure Army. You're going to mainly want to have your Ghost out there for your healing, but everything else does help with your DPS. Followed up by Death Skulls. This is where the Zuck Cape plays into effect. You don't need the Zuck Cape. It's there for the extra damage, all the AoE for bouncing all across the water fiends. After that, we do have Soul Strike, so it's another AoE ability. So we have Soul Sap behind that, so we can cast that. Touch of Death is followed up just as a filler spot, and then we have Sacrifice for a little extra HP regeneration throughout the fighting. Although this method is AFKable, you do want to keep an eye on your inventory, so if it's filled up with binding contracts, you're going to want to make sure you know all of them as soon as possible, because once it is full, then you are losing on chances of gaining binding contracts. What you can also do is you can augment one of your armor pieces, and then you can throw on Scavenging. Now, I only have Scavenging 3 because Scavenging 4 seems like it's nearly impossible to find. But what Scavenging does, it does help you find invention materials as you are killing your enemies. And that is a giant shout out to Jacob Zymanic, who has pointed that out in a previous video. So if you guys are also interested in comments being shown on videos, make sure you leave a comment down below. Now, what you guys have probably been waiting for, the profits. So I did a 10-minute test run by just killing water fiends for the binding contracts. In the end, I came up with about 295 binding contracts within 10 minutes. Now, that 10 minutes does equate to about 40.6 million GP. So to equate everything into 1 hour, you got to think that you have to make the binding contracts. For this method, you need tons and tons of binding contracts. So it's going to take up a good bit of time. So within an hour, about 30 minutes is going to be about you making the binding contracts. And the other 30 minutes is, of course, you going out, killing the water fiends, and collecting the binding contracts with their souls in. At the end of the day, you're going to be looking at about 120 million GP in just the binding contracts. And then you have to take in all of your expenses. So the Blood of Orcus and the Hellfire Metals are probably going to be your most expensive thing unless you were going out and getting them yourself. So the Blood of Orcus and the Hellfire Metals, if you are buying them from the GE, will cost around 64 million GP. Then you have to take into account of all of your cannons that you were using, and if you're running with tier 80, so maybe you're a lower level and you're running around with some elder overloads or just overloads just in general, or maybe you have an EOF on because you just don't trust the process, then you have to take into effect of all your expenses that you are putting together. After my 10-minute run and all of my expenses equaled together, I'm looking at about 62.3 million GP per hour, which is pretty insane to think about for something that is this AFKable besides the initial binding contract making. So if you guys go ahead and you are doing this method, please let me know down in the comments how it has gone for you. In this method, we will be killing Calgarian demons to make their binding contracts. Compared to the other binding contract methods, this one's a little steep when it comes to the requirements. You will need 90 Dungeoneering just to be able to damage the Calgarian demons. You will need 90 Summoning just so you can be able to capture them inside of the binding contracts and or use the Calgarian demon binding contract. I also put on there 90 plus combat as a requirement because these things do hit like a truck and you want to be able to put out as much damage as possible. Just like the other binding contract methods, you will need the Dagon by mystery completed, which does require 68 archaeology. As for the recommended 95 plus prayer for your curses, if you have them unlocked. If not, I highly suggest going right after that before even attempting to do this kind of method or anything above this method. I also highly recommend 96 plus herblore so you have your overloads, which could be boosted so you can get the higher tier overloads, but the typical overloads should work with this method as well. You will look around 52 mil GP per hour after expenses, around 350,000 XP per hour for necromancy, and 150,000 XP per hour for constitution. As for the gear, we're going to be using the tier 90 Death Dealer set, the Vampirism Aura, the Zuck Cape, yes, the Zuck Cape, since I've had a lot of comments talking about me using the Zuck Cape, the Demon Horn Necklace, Luck of the Dwarves, which if you don't have the Luck of the Dwarves, it doesn't do too much besides having the rare drop table. So any luck enhancer or DPS ring would do here. I have the Nexus for all of my Necro ruins. I have the tier 90 weapons as well with the Scripture of One God book. For the inventory, I do have an Elder Overload salve. I bring those everywhere I go, but a Holy Overload would just do as good here. Next, we have a full restore flask just in case the Demon Horn Necklace and the Ectoplasmator does an upkeep with all the ash drops to keep your prayer up and going. Spring cleaners for anything Slayer wise, it is important to always take because everything always drops alcohols, and these guys drop a ton of alcohols, which you will see at the end result. We also have a bunch of magic note papers. You don't need that many, but you do need to be able to note all of your binding contracts over time so it doesn't fill up your inventory and you have to keep banking. Next, we have the Seedicide. They do drop some seeds, which will help you gain some farming XP, but they don't drop a whole lot. It just helps clean up the floor when you're looking for loot. Ectoplasmator is next. It does go hand in hand with the Demon Horn Necklace, so every ash drop that hits the ground, you pick up immediately, and it just uses it and renews your prayer. Charming Imp, which is kind of important here because they do drop a ton of charms, and they do drop the blue charms pretty often, so you'll gain back all the blue charms that you used while making the binding contracts. Next, that you see on the very bottom right hand corner are the binding contracts, which are probably the most important thing for this method to be in your inventory, because without them you can't collect the binding contracts of the Calgarian demons to make your profit. Before we get into it, I'd like to point out that 96% of you are not subscribed to the channel. So if you guys are enjoying what you're watching, make sure to hit that sub button. All right, without that, let's get right back into it. Now, before getting into the actual method, first off, you have to do the agonizing part of making your binding contracts. Now, with this method I'm about to tell you, you can make about 700 binding contracts in about 20 minutes. So with this method, all you have to do is you go to Taverly, you bring all of the materials. You bring your pouches, your blue charms, your spirit shards, your hellfire metal, and your blood of Orcus. Once you get over to the obelisk, there will be a trader there called Magistics. What you're going to do is you're going to take your blood of Orcus and your hellfire metal, and you're going to sell little by little to the trader in the store. Now, I say little by little because for as long as your materials sit inside of the trader's store, it starts to deteriorate. So you'll notice that I have 1,400 of each hellfire metal and blood of Orcus, and at the end, I only make about 682 binding contracts. So over time, it starts to disappear from the store. Now, there are a few ways to be able to get to the Calgarian Demon dungeon. First off, you would use your Dungeoneering cape, which would be in your max cape, of course. What you're just going to do is you're going to hit the next thing. You're just going to hit the Calgarian Demon resource dungeon, and it will pop you right in front of the Calgarian Demon dungeon door. The next method is using the archaeology journal to teleport to the archaeology guild. Run over to the table, then you're just going to click on the Damonheim dig site. You can use the Ring of Kingship that you gain from the Damonheim area, and it will teleport you to the exact same spot. Either way, once you arrive in Damonheim, you will look on your minimap. You will see either a mining icon or the dungeon entrance icon. Depending on how you have your minimap set up, you just click over in that area. Your character will run over there automatically. Now, once you are in the dungeon, my favorite thing to do is run into the middle or run all the way to the northwest corner. I just run in the middle. I sip on the Elder Overload Salve. I make sure my God Book is on, my Vampirism Aura is active, and then I hit my Darkness and I just get to work. Now, the way I usually run with the Calgarian Demons is I am active. I'm active when I'm in this dungeon, attacking each one by one, putting in my own abilities, having a Revo bar that kind of makes it work to where you gain all your stacks and you just do all of your other stuff manually. As for the Revo bar, it's a little complicated since they do attack from ranged distance using melee damage, which makes no sense to me. Again, they are so spread apart, so you can't use the certain abilities like Blood Siphon or Scythe since they're so spread apart, and it's just not going to maximize your damage. So with the Revo bar, I have the Death Skulls in the front, Conjure Army, Command Ghost, Soul Strike, Touch of Death, then I have Volley of Souls, and then Finger of Death on there. But you guys can play around with it as much as possible. I just use that as a Revo bar, and then I just manually input the special ability, maybe a bloat every once in a while, just as long as you are taking out the Calgarian Demons comfortably and quick. Now, you can make this an AFKable method. You just need higher gear and higher weapons, and then you just bring either a cannon or an Odak coil so they all stay aggro to you, or you just bring some aggro pots and holy aggro overloads, and then they'll just be able to attack you while you walk away. But I highly suggest that you have high tier weapons and high tier gear, maybe with certain perks on them, so you are able to walk away from it. So after doing about 10 minutes of running around killing Calgarian Demons, I got about 500,000 GP from just the alchables. I got 47 Calgarian Demon binding contracts, 2 uncut onyxes, some ruins, some fire talismans. I did leave a bunch on the floor, like all the herbs and all the uncut diamonds, stuff like that. So you could make possibly a little bit more if you picked up everything. But with all of that, I made about 11.5 mil GP, which equates about 235 Calgarian Demons killed, which means you need to make 235 binding contracts, which you can do in about 10 minutes. And using the last 50 minutes of the hour killing Calgarian Demons, making the binding contracts. Now, using 10 minutes of making the binding contract and 50 minutes of actually killing and collecting every single loot on the ground, you're going to be looking at around 58 million GP per hour, all before the expenses. All your expenses are the typical Hellfire Metals, your Blood of Orcuses, your Ruins, your Divine Charges if you're using anything augmented, your Scripture of When God Book scripture pages, along with the Elder Overload Salve if you're using any kind of overloads, and or the springs inside of your spring cleaner. Now, if you do make this an AFKable method, your profit will drop. Of course, there will be times where your inventory does fill up too much with your binding contracts and you stop collecting binding contracts, or you miss certain drops on the floor. So let's say you miss a couple uncut onyxes, your profits do drop a good bit of margin. In this video, we're going to be talking about binding contracts. For the sake of keeping a video short, we're only going to be specifically talking about the Blood Reaver binding contracts. Now, this method is a mid-level method, possibly up to a high tier method if you really look at it that way, but the requirements are pretty simple. You need 73 summoning to be able to make the binding contracts. You need 73 slayer to even be able to attack the blood reavers, 68 archaeology to be able to do the daggone by archaeology mystery, 70 agility, 70 range, and 70 strength to be able to use the frozen key. We can get into that in a little bit. For the quest, you do need to finish the Dagon by Archaeology mystery, which is required for you to be able to make the binding contracts to be able to do this method. Also, you need to do the Death Plateau and the Troll Stronghold to be able to enter the God Wars dungeon. Also, highly recommended in this is 90 plus combat stats. In this video, we are going to be using Necromancy, so you can probably be doing this method even at level 80. Also, you're going to want 96 plus Herblore just so you can get your overloads, and curses are a high recommendation to have unlocked for majority of combat within this game. With this method, you're also looking at about 52.4 million GP per hour making Blood Reaver scrolls. That's insane for something that is so simple and possibly even AFKable. Along with that, you're looking at 250,000 XP per hour with Necromancy, 42,000 XP per hour with Summoning, and 80,000 XP per hour for your Constitution. Now, once you reach the requirements, the first step to do, of course, is to make your binding contracts. In order to do that, you need 4 materials. First off, you need your Spirit Shards, your Hellfire Metal, your Blood of Orcus, and your Blue Charms. You can get the Blood of Orcus and Hellfire Metal from Archaeology material caches. You just got to search around. Some are actually in the God Wars dungeon itself. For the Spirit Shards, you can actually buy them from the traders that do summoning within RuneScape, and I believe some traders do sell big packages as well. For Blue Charms, normal mode Arc Glacier is your go-to for charms. He drops 3 piles after each normal mode kill and always has charms in it, and blue charms are actually highly dropped from Arc Glacier. As for the method of making the binding contracts, there is a certain method that you can use with the trader in Taverley. You'll take your Hellfire Metal and your Blood of Orcus, you'll sell it to the trader, and then you just buy them back over time after you make your binding contracts. Now, a little fact about that is if you leave them in long enough, the stock for your materials does start to go down. So if you do this method, make sure you don't throw in 1,000 at a time. Just do a couple hundred every so often, and you'll lose maybe 2 material each while doing this method. Now, once you're finished making all of your binding contracts, now it's time to get ready to go fight all the Blood Reavers. So first off, in the inventory, you're going to see I have Holy Aggro Overloads. You do not need them. I didn't know they were already aggro to you within the Ancient Prison. So you're going to at least bring Holy Overloads, at least a Super Restore Flask, and all of your binding contracts, and then plenty and plenty and plenty of magic notepaper. As for the gear, I do run with the tier 95 set, but you can easily do it with the tier 90 Death Dealer set. Just in this video, you're going to see me running with the first Necromancer set. So the gear is going to be first Necromancer set. We're going to be running with the Penance Aura. If you don't have the Penance Aura, the Vampirism Aura does work 100% of the way as well. We do have the Zuck Cape. We have the Essence of Finality. You don't need it. A Blood Amulet will work just fine. We are also running with the Reaver Ring. Next, we have the Nexus to hold all of our ruins. I am running with the tier 95 weapons in this video. You don't need them. Tier 90s would work perfectly fine. Next, we do have the Scripture of When God book. In this video, you're going to see I don't even activate it, so you don't really need it with you, but it does do extra damage in case you want to make more profit by maybe getting a few more kills within your hour. Now, you can find the Blood Reavers in the Ancient Prison, which is in the God Wars dungeon itself behind the frozen door. Now, before attempting to pass the frozen door, you will need a frozen key. In order to make the frozen key, you need to collect all the parts from all the followers of the gods within the God Wars dungeon itself. Without the frozen key, there is no way to be able to pass the frozen door to access the Blood Reavers in the ancient prison. Now, there is a few ways that you can get to the frozen door itself. First off, if you're a max player, you can easily go up to the boss portal, go to next, and then you're just going to click option number 1, and then you're just going to go and teleport right into the stairway where it takes you through the frozen doorway to be able to go into the ancient prison itself. Now, if you don't have the pleasure of going through the max guild portal just quite yet, you can always go to War's Retreat, reattune one of your portals to one of the bosses inside of the God World's dungeon itself. In my opinion, I would say Kriara is probably the closest to the frozen door. Once you hop through the portal, you're going to be attacked almost immediately. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to run all the way across, and you're going to find the shortcut, and you're just going to jump across it. Once you're across the shortcut, you're just going to run southeast to the frozen door with the frozen key in your inventory, unless you have permanently unlocked the frozen door itself. Once you go through the frozen door, you're just going to run down the stairs and you have accessed the ancient prison. Once you made it to the ancient prison, what you're going to do is you're going to go through the frozen doorway and you're going to run up to the snowy spot down in the south. This is the area where I found it best for the Blood Reavers spawning. So when you get to the spot, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to activate your Overload, you're going to activate your Scripture of Wind book, you're going to activate either your Vampirism or your Penance Aura, and then you're just going to attack all the Blood Reavers in the area. Now once you start collecting your Blood Reaver scrolls, you're going to use a magic notepaper on it, and you're just going to note every single scroll that's in your inventory. Now, if you are fully active while doing this method, you can expect anywhere between 600 to 650 kills an hour. Now, you can make this an AFKable method, but the problem with that is when you're standing in the middle, you're going to have all the warriors and all the rangers attacking you, and you're going to be turning your attention to attack them back instead of attacking the Blood Reavers themselves. Also, you're going to be filling up your inventory pretty quickly, so you're going to have to manage your magic notepaper with your scrolls quite often while doing this method, or you're going to be missing so many opportunities on putting scrolls in your inventory. After about 10 minutes of doing this method, I came out with 107 Blood Reaver scrolls, which equates to me spending about 7.8 million GP in order to make all the binding contracts and to get all of my inventory full for what I need to do the method. Now, I don't know if I got lucky or not, but I was able to sell 100 of them instantly for GE price. And after waiting a couple minutes, the rest sold at GE price, which gave us a profit of about 9 million GP within that 10 minutes. So if we kept at the rate that we were doing with this method, we were going to be looking at about 54 million GP per hour, which is insane to think about, that this is a method that is possibly AFKable if you have the right setup, and maybe if you're even standing in the right spot within the ancient prison. We are going to be making binding contracts by killing the Ripper demons. As for the requirements are going to be super high because these things hit like a truck, and they have a mechanic that can one-shot you if you do not deal with them fast enough. So for the requirements, you're going to need 96 Slayer so you can actually damage the Ripper demons just by requirements, 96 Summoning so you can capture the souls inside of the binding contracts. You're also going to want 90 plus combat to be able to actually deal with the Ripper demons fast enough before they actually do their one-shot mechanic. So higher combat, the better, of course. 96 Herbler so you can have your Elder Overload salves. You want that prayer renewal as much as often. 95 prayer and the Temple Acid Test and quest completed so you can use your Ancient Curses because Deflect Melee is crucial for this AFK method. 68 Archaeology and the Dagon Bind Mystery completed so you can make your binding contracts. And finally, your Cannon Restock perk from the Artisan Workshop is super crucial here to keep aggro with all of the Ripper demons, and we'll talk about that a little later in the method. But you can get that by doing some smithing activity inside of the Artisan Workshop, gaining some respect, using the respect to buy the perk. Now, while doing this method, you're going to be looking at about 160 million GP per hour. I'm going to explain that later on in this video. With that being said, you're also going to be looking at about 400,000 XP per hour for your Constitution. And if you're using Necromancy, you're also going to look at about 1.1 million XP per hour for that, which is insane. As for the inventory and gear, this gear setup is meant to be used for the Animate Dead spell, but if you don't have the City of Sunteston quest completed quite yet, we don't need the Animate Dead spell. It just helps with the damage reduction over time. So for the gear, we are going to be running with 3 pieces of the Death Warden outfit, the helm, the body, and the legs. Then we're also going to be using 2 pieces of crippling for the effect for the melee damage reduction, so we have that for the gloves and boots. We will be using the inspiration aura, so anything that helps generate any kind of adrenaline does help with this method. You can get away with vampirism, but the way the Reaver Bar works, anything that helps generate with the adrenaline is going to make the Reaver Bar go off a lot more. We'll get into the Reaver Bar here in a second though. Next, we do have the Zuck Cape. Anything with a high necromancy stat will go wonderful with this. After that, we do have the Blood Amulet of Fury, just for the extra healing. For our ring of choice, we did go with the Ring of Death, and if you guys didn't know, it has an effect for every enemy killed. It has a 50% chance of regaining some adrenaline per its life points. Along with that, if you die, it does save you a little bit of time to be able to quick telly out towards retreat or wherever you have a quick telly to. So Ring of Choice is pretty crucial to gain adrenaline with this method. Now I do have a Grasping Ruin pouch inside of the gear, just because I don't have the upgraded Nexus, so that prayer bonus does go a long way. I do have tier 95 weapons, which is almost mandatory. The tier 90s could cut it for a little bit of time, but they don't help you last a very long time AFK in this. We do have the Scripture of When book along with us. That's because it's an AoE ability. You're going to have a bunch of Ripper Demons stacked up on you, so you're going to want to be able to attack them periodically with a giant AoE attack. As for the inventory, I have my Elder Overload salves. I have some weapon poison plus since they are poisonable, and I do have an enhanced Excalibur, so if you have that, bring that along. Magic notepaper, so you can know all your binding contracts that you collect along the way. Quorum Incense decks, so you do more poison damage. I have my Grasping Ruin pouch also within my inventory for my Animate Dead and my Prism of Restoration, which I will get into just a little bit. I have my binding contracts. I have my Blood Reavers and the Blood Reaver Scrolls. So with the Blood Reaver, you're going to want to set the auto attack to 4, fill it with the Blood Reaver Scrolls, and you're going to use your Prism of Restoration every so often when the health starts to get a little low. Now, it's not a crucial part. It just helps you stay alive within the whole time. There's times where you start getting a little low on health and you start getting worried, but then your Blood Reaver is there to help you out, even though your Reaver Bar could help you in the long run. After that, we do have our cannon and our cannon balls. We have a Powder of Penance. You're going to want to bring those along if you're going to try to stay for a long period of time, because they do restore your prayer every time you get hit. Next, we do have our Nexus for all of our Necromancy ruins. We have our Spring Cleaner. They drop a lot of alcohols. Must have. Now, you can also bring the Artificial Measure or a gem bag to grab all the gems if you really want to, but from what I saw, they were mainly noted, so it didn't really truly help. Charming Imp. I'm not going to emphasize this enough. Bring a Charming Imp or collect all the blue charms. You most likely will literally get all of your blue charms back from making your binding contracts while killing Ripper Demons. I also like to bring an Ectoplasmator just because they drop so many ashes, and it helps with your prayer experience along the way if you want to collect some prayer, or you can collect all the ashes and make a little bit more profit. That is all up to you. As for the relic powers, I was using the Berserker's Fury, Death Ward, and the Fury of the Small. The Fury of the Small is probably the most mandatory thing here because it helps generate your adrenaline the most. And of course, the Berserker Furies gives you more damage per health lost, and the Death Ward also helps damage reduction with more health lost as well. As for the perks on all of my gear, they're not best in slot, but they worked. So for my Soulbound Lantern, I was able to use Aftershock 4, which did more than enough damage to help me out with all of their special attacks. Now, the Omni Guard, I used Eruptive 3, Ruthless 2. If you can get your hands on Eruptive 4, Ruthless 3, that is the best in slot for this method. It's just super rare. From my understanding, it's almost impossible to get. After that, we do have our Death Ward on top with Enhanced Devoted Fort, which is crucial for this AFK method because that just helps negate all damage when your deflect melee is up. And then after that, we have Crystal Shield Fort, which I saw it help me out plenty of times during this method. For our Reaver Bar, we're going to be using Conjure Army, Spectral Scythe, Soul Strike, Blood Siphon, Soul Sap, and Sacrifice. Now we have the Spectral Scythe up in the front of the Revo bar so we can use it as often as possible. And that's why I was saying you want stuff on your perks and or use the Inspiration Aura to be able to generate as much adrenaline as possible so we can use it every time that it is off of cooldown. Now we do have Blood Siphon in the Revo bar, so everything being bundled together, you hit Blood Siphon, it siphons everything that's around in your area and it just regenerates health for you. Along with Sacrifice at the end of the Revo bar, so every time it hits and if it kills, it does generate additional HP. Now, before getting into the actual method, first off, you have to do the agonizing part of making your binding contracts. Now, with this method I'm about to tell you, you can make about 700 binding contracts in about 20 minutes. So with this method, all you have to do is you go to Taverly, you bring all of the materials. You bring your pouches, your blue charms, your spirit shards, your hellfire metal, and your blood of Orcus. Once you get over to the obelisk, there will be a trader there called Magistics. What you're going to do is you're going to take your blood of Orcus and your hellfire metal, and you're going to sell little by little to the trader in the store. Now, I say little by little because for as long as your materials sit inside of the trader's store, it starts to deteriorate. So you'll notice that I have 1,400 of each hellfire metal and blood of Orcus, and at the end I only make about 682 binding contracts. So over time it starts to disappear from the store. Now we will be doing this method inside of the wilderness. As you see on the map above, you will see that I circled around where the Ripper demons are within the wilderness. Now, since I never completed the wilderness achievements or never finished the Dragonkin Laboratory Elite Dungeon, my method is I teleport to the Zambrakian Undercity, I run over to the chest, and I teleport to the Dragonkin Laboratory. But if you guys have finished either one of those, you can easily use the Wilderness Sword. You can go to the farming spot that's out in the middle of it, run north, then run west, and you'll get to your spot. Or you can just teleport straight to the Dragonkin Laboratory, and then you just run around into the wilderness, run past the greater demons, and then you'll get into the spot that I'm going to talk about in a second. So currently I am standing in the spot just south of them to where the Ripper demons cannot attack. In this spot, this is where you get everything ready. Your Quorum Incense decks, your Weapon Poison, your Elder Overload Salves, you turn on your Aura, you turn on your God Book, and then you eat one of your powder appendices if that's what you do with them. You summon your Blood Reaver, you fill it with scrolls, you make sure that the auto attack is set to 4, then you hit your Animate Dead if that's what you are using here. Now for the most complicated part, what you're going to have to do, you're going to run up to the top where you see on screen, you're going to place your Dwarf Cannon down, fill it with cannonballs, then you're just going to run south into the spot that you see me run into here. Now what I typically do here would be a Threads of Fate, maybe a Soul Sap and a Volley of Souls followed right after it, so you can try to take out as many Ripper demons as you possibly can before they generate enough adrenaline to use their special attack and one-shot you. Now what you can actually do is you can also deflect melee prayer on and then use devotion while running through all the Ripper demons, so you don't take a whole lot of damage while you're setting down the cannon and filling it with cannonballs and getting to your spot. Now don't get me wrong, this is probably the most complicated part of this method. There's going to be probably plenty of times where you die while putting down the cannon, or your ring's going to proc to where you have to quick telly, which could actually work in your favor tremendously. So when your Ring of Death procs, I would highly recommend that you do quick telly back to War's Retreat as soon as possible before you die and you have to spend a buttload of coins in order to gain all your stuff back, and then you just run back. But why this could help you out tremendously, it's because by the time you run back with your cannon attacking all of them, their adrenaline is not gained. So you can easily just run right into the spot that you need to be in, and then you just start attacking and gaining up all of your adrenaline along the way. Now I still prefer to, protect melee devotion so you get in your spot with almost nearly full health, so everything can work out perfectly fine. But you want to make sure that they don't have adrenaline when you first attack. So this could be a method that you can go about. Go place your cannon, go hit them with a Threads of Fate, a Soul Sap, and then a Volley of Souls. Teleport back towards Retreat. Then you just refill your inventory and you run right back to your spot. Now doing this method, you're going to want to keep an eye on your Blood Reaver's health. Use Prism of Restoration whenever you need to, along with all the other stuff. If you start running low on the Outer Overload Salves, sip one. If you feel like you're going to run low on a Weapon Poison +++, sip one. If your health is getting low and you're starting to feel weary about it, hit your Enhanced Excalibur. You're just going to keep an eye on everything and make sure everything is working into your favor. If not, you can perish pretty quickly while doing this method. So you want to keep an eye on everything and be on high alert, but it is an AFKable method to where you can also walk away from it when your health is full. You only want to pay attention when your health starts to get a little lower. You might have to hit devotion if you have enough adrenaline for it. If not, if you guys have the limitless ability, you can use that, and then you can use devotion, but limitless is pretty pricey, and hopefully things start to drop with the vital spark so I can get myself that ability. But the main thing you want to focus on is noting all of your binding contracts. If you don't do that, then you're just wasting your time killing the Ripper demons, and then you're not making as much profit as you can. With this method, you can expect to kill around 1,600 Ripper demons. Yes, 1,600 Ripper demons in 1 hour. So what I highly suggest is go and take 1 hour of making binding contracts. You can make 700 binding contracts in 20 minutes, so you can make 2,100 binding contracts in an hour. So you take an hour of making binding contracts, and then you take another hour of killing Ripper demons. As for the profits, I did a 5-minute test, and after grabbing all the binding contracts and a couple of nice little drops, I was able to get 39.9 mil within that 5 minutes. Now for all the expenses, which is your ruins for your animate dead and your prism of restoration spells, your blood reaver scrolls, your necromancy ruins, all of the materials you need for your binding contracts. After all of that, you're looking at about 28.3 million GP of profit in that 5 minutes. So what that is telling me, that is about 170 million GP per hour while doing this method with the Ripper demons, which is absurd for a Slayer creature. So if you can get past the initial part of setting up everything with your cannon, getting in the right spot, and making sure that there is no Ripper demons in the very beginning with the full adrenaline to where they are going to use their special attack and one-shot you, then this method goes smoothly. You just got to make sure you got to follow it. You got to pay attention a little bit here and there with your Blood Reaver and making sure that you're noting all of your binding contracts. Other than that, this method is a good method for anybody who wants to make a lot of money while doing combat. But this is the end of the video. If you guys found anything interesting or useful within this method, make sure to hit that like button. If you guys are brand new to the channel and like to see more money making methods like this, or even on the skilling aspect of things, make sure to hit the sub button and hit the bell icon so you guys know when I upload next. If you guys also have any other tips or tricks for new players within the game that I forgot to mention within this video, make sure to leave a comment down below for everybody else to read. But until next time, guys, I hope you stay safe. See ya.